He knelt in the forum, shirtless, blind, his mouth stained red. The screams had stopped hours ago, but the silence was worse. All eyes were on her, the woman in imperial purple, seated not on a throne, but on stone steps slick with blood. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She only spoke once. Eat. Before we tell you how a Roman empress brought the most powerful man in the empire to his knees and made him consume his own eyes, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to follow every step of the story, and after, tell us in the comments. Was it justice or madness? Her name was Illyria. You won't find her in school books. Her statues were melted, her name struck from the imperial ledgers. But Rome never forgets. The gutters still whisper of her. The wives in the noble villas tell her tale in hushed tones, not out of fear, but awe. She arrived in chains. The year was 188 CE. Gaius Aurelius had just returned victorious from the Danube campaigns. The streets of Rome reeked of sweat and wine, celebrating yet another imperial triumph. Among the prisoners brought back from the north was a girl barely 17, pale, bruised, but standing upright despite the shackles. Gaius didn't notice her at first. He had no need to. He was prefectus of the imperial guard, consort to power, lion of the battlefield. Women blurred before him, but Illyria did not blur. She did not bow. When he ordered her collar removed, she looked directly into his eyes and smiled. That was the first time anyone ever described Gaius Aurelius as uncertain. No one knew what made him take her. Some said it was lust, others witchcraft. His wife was dead, his appetite uncontested, and Illyria was different. She did not scream in the night like the others. She did not cry. She listened. She asked questions. She watched him, not as a woman admires a man, but as a tactician studies a map. And when she spoke, it was only ever in Latin. Perfectly, too perfectly for a barbarian girl. Within a month, she no longer wore chains. Within a season, she no longer lived in the servant wing. And within a year, the Senate received an announcement: the widower Gaius Aurelius would take a new wife, Illyria. There were protests, of course. She was a foreigner, unblooded, untested. But Gaius silenced them all with a feast that lasted 3 days and a military parade twice the size of his previous victory march. Senators grumbled, but they bowed. The marriage shocked Rome, but the shock faded, and admiration grew. Illyria did not stay in the shadows. She learned names, faces, debts, loyalties. She dined with widows of dead generals. She arranged festivals for the children of senators. She whispered advice in Gaius's ear, and he listened. Rome had many empresses, but none like her. She didn't wield a sword. She didn't need to. She had him. And for a time they ruled together, a golden couple. Statues were raised, coins minted with their faces. A child was born, Lucian. The people loved him. Gaius's enemies stayed quiet, but power breeds temptation, and temptation doesn't stay hidden forever. One summer, a new servant girl entered the villa, small, young, and southern-born. Her name was Thalia. She had sun-warmed skin and hands too delicate for labor. And within 2 moons, Gaius's private chambers began locking at unusual hours. Illyria noticed. She always noticed, but she said nothing, not yet. The villa grew quieter, not in the usual way, not the hush of satisfied servants or the calm of disciplined order. This quiet was different. It was the kind that creeps in after a scream has been stifled, a silence that knew too much. The guards didn't speak as much. The steward averted his eyes more than usual. Even the birds in the courtyard seemed to sing less. Illyria moved through this silence like smoke, unnoticed unless she wished to be. She did not storm chambers or scream accusations. She didn't confront. She studied. She watched Gaius disappear into his study for hours when no letters had arrived. She watched Thalia return from the inner halls with cheeks too flush for midday sun. She listened to servants exchange quick, nervous words that died in their throats when she passed, and she waited. Gaius, meanwhile, was blind in the worst way a man of power could be. Confident, Thalia was a distraction. Soft laughter, gentle praise, the kind of sweetness Illyria had long replaced with sharp wit and quiet strategy. He thought the affair was hidden, or worse, that it didn't need hiding. He underestimated her. Illyria was not a woman scorned. She was something far more dangerous, a woman calculating. She began in the gardens. The old gardener, loyal for decades, was dismissed without explanation, replaced by two young assistants who reported directly to her. Then the house steward, then the captain of the night guard. Illyria did not remove them publicly. She offered them early retirement, generous pensions, even praise for their service, but always with a smile that left no room for return. The villa changed from the inside. New faces appeared, silent, watchful, disciplined. The maids began to speak less. The kitchen stopped serving Thalia's favorite sweets. The lanterns in the west wing, where Thalia had recently been assigned, flickered more often, and at night the footsteps in the corridors moved with deliberate softness. Gaius noticed none of it. He had become indulgent. Too many years as Rome's golden general had made him dull to shadows. He ate without caution, drank without measure, and slept too deeply. And when he did notice small things, a missing guard, a replacement servant, a subtle shift in power, Illyria was always ready. That man? He asked to leave. His wife fell ill. The wine steward? He was skimming from the barrels. I sent him home. The young woman in the gardens? Oh, just a temporary helper. She smiled and he believed her. Because he wanted to. But the Senate began to murmur. It started with questions. Quiet inquiries during banquets, light comments veiled in humor. How much influence did the empress truly have? Was Gaius still the one issuing orders? Or had he abdicated that power behind bedroom doors? Some senators grew uneasy, others intrigued, but all of them knew one thing. Illyria was not like the women before her. She visited temples not to pray, but to observe. She donated to orphanages, but always through intermediaries she later hired. She wrote letters to distant provinces that Gaius never read, signed documents he never saw. She forged alliances in her own name, subtle, unofficial, but binding. The old men of Rome watched a new center of gravity form, and they whispered, but Illyria didn't seek the Senate's favor. She sought control, and control, she knew, was never won in chambers of marble, but in chambers of flesh. She paid visits to Thalia's family, quietly, respectfully, as if checking on the welfare of imperial servants. She discovered a mother in debt, a father in prison, a brother with gambling problems, and she solved all of it, generously, discreetly. The family received aid, a house, even coin, but they received no explanation, and Thalia noticed. The girl began to hesitate. Her laughter dulled. Her eyes grew cautious. Gaius, annoyed by the change, spent more time away, returning to Illyria's bed with empty affection and restless hands. She welcomed him. She played the role of a wife restored, gentle, and generous. She rubbed oil into his shoulders and listened to his drunken slurs about Senate politics. She feigned laughter at his bitterness, soothed his pride when his name was left out of dispatches. She was patient, soft, warm, And when he fell asleep, she moved like water. One night she took from his study a ring seal, imperial, marked with the emblem of the eagle. The next morning, 2 letters were dispatched, one to the legate of the Ninth Legion in Gaul, another to the chief tax collector in Africa. They bore his seal, they bore her words. It was the first act of imperial authority Gaius had never authorized, and it would not be the last. Weeks passed, then months, and the villa's silence deepened. Thalia, once the golden-haired secret of the halls, now walked like a ghost. The servants no longer smiled at her. She was served last at meals. Her chamber candles were always half burned, and in the hallway she often saw Illyria, not staring, not glaring, simply there, watching. And then came the order. Thalia was to be reassigned. No explanation, no protest accepted. She was removed from the villa at dusk, not in shame, not in chains, but in quiet efficiency. Gaius didn't speak of it, not to Illyria, not to the Senate, not even to his son. But something shifted in him. He drank more. His commands grew sloppier. His presence in council meetings became erratic, and when he did appear, he was more volatile, snapping at advisors, contradicting himself, forgetting names. Rumors of illness began to circle. Some suspected poison, others madness. But only Illyria knew the truth. He wasn't poisoned. He was isolated. Every supporter removed. Every whisper around him reshaped. Every alliance corroded. And every time he tried to lean on her, she offered nothing but calm concern. "I'm worried about you, my love. You need rest. Let me handle things." And he did. He let go of responsibility, of suspicion, of control. Until one day the Senate chamber received a new decree, signed by Gaius, sealed with his ring, but penned in a hand only Illyria's secretaries recognized. A decree of state restructuring, a decree that shifted command of the imperial guard to the empress. No one contested it, not out loud, because the silence around her had become too large, too complete. And as Gaius sat alone in his marble study, unaware of the ink drying on the page that made him a figurehead, Illyria stood at the balcony, watching the city she now controlled. Brick by brick, name by name, nerve by nerve. She had not struck back yet. She hadn't needed to. But vengeance, she knew, was not about anger. It was about timing. Gaius Aurelius had commanded legions. He had burned fortresses to the ground, stood in the mud of Britannia with blood in his beard and arrows in his shoulder. He had silenced barbarians with one raised fist and watched enemy kings kneel at his feet. But none of that prepared him for what it felt like to be ignored. Power does not vanish overnight. It fades, slowly, cruelly. It began with missed meetings, advisors forgetting to inform him, messengers claiming they couldn't find him, briefings held without his presence. When he arrived, chairs were already filled, conversations already moving. When he spoke, people nodded politely but moved on. He laughed it off at first. "Let the wife play empress," he joked to a drinking companion. "Let her feel clever. A year from now, she'll be asking me how to sign a trade deal." But weeks passed, then months, and the palace no longer echoed his name. It echoed hers. "Ask Illyria. The empress will decide. Her Majesty prefers we wait for her counsel." Even his son, little Lucian, now 9, began mimicking her tone, her phrasing. Gaius watched from a balcony one morning as Lucian corrected a tutor using a term Illyria had once whispered in Gaius's own ear during a private negotiation. The boy had absorbed her, every rhythm, every expression, like a sponge. That was the moment Gaius finally admitted it. He was no longer ruling, but he didn't act. He couldn't. Every move he tried to make was preempted, politely, efficiently. A letter he wrote never got delivered. A military inspection he requested was rescheduled 3 times. When he tried to summon the captain of the Praetorians, he was told the captain was away on assignment, one he hadn't approved. Still, he resisted believing the full shape of what had happened until the invitation arrived. A banquet, a private one, hosted by Illyria. No official occasion, no political objective, just a celebration of unity, as the parchment said. The guest list included senators who had once despised her, generals who had sworn loyalty to Gaius directly, even the high priest of Vesta, who hadn't set foot in the palace in 2 years. And Gaius, his name was included, at the bottom, under family. He stared at it for minutes, and then, for the first time in over a decade, he felt fear. The night of the banquet was warm and windless. Torches lined the colonnades, casting soft gold across marble. The hall shimmered with silk and jewels, but the music was subdued. Minor keys, deliberate rhythm. No laughter, just measured politeness. Gaius entered late, unannounced. Conversation stopped, eyes flicked toward him, then back to their plates. No one rose, no one greeted him. Illyria remained seated at the head of the long, curved table. A thin golden band circled her brow. Not a crown. Not yet, but close. She sipped from a dark goblet, met his gaze, and smiled faintly. "Welcome," she said, as if greeting a distant cousin. He took a seat, not beside her. There was no space left. He sat near the middle, between 2 foreign merchants whose names he didn't know. The food was exquisite, the wine spiced and aged. The conversation moved on without him, but the humiliation wasn't complete until dessert. One of the guests, a fat senator with wine-purple teeth, leaned toward Gaius and asked, "Did you once lead the 8th Legion, sir?" The room stilled for just a moment. Gaius blinked. "I commanded it," he said flatly, "for 12 years. "Ah, yes," the senator said, nodding. "I thought I recognized the name." "Fine work." "Fine." He turned away before Gaius could speak again. By the end of the evening, Gaius didn't remember what he'd eaten. He returned to his chambers in silence and found a letter waiting. It was sealed with Illyria's personal mark. Not the imperial seal, not a public dispatch, just her private emblem, a coiled serpent around a mirror. He didn't open it right away. He bathed first, sat by the fire, listened to the wind shift through the palace eaves. Then with trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside were just 2 lines. "I know about the girl. I forgave you the moment I saw her." He read it twice, then a third time. Forgave. She had known all along, from the beginning, and yet she hadn't acted. Not with rage, not with grief, but with preparation, calculation, patience. Gaius finally understood. She hadn't taken power in revenge. She had taken it because she was better. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching the moon float above the city. He felt something loosen in his chest. Not guilt, not shame, something worse. Irrelevance. Thalia was gone. His guards were gone. His titles still hung on the wall, but none of them meant anything anymore. The empire moved without him. Rome no longer needed Gaius Aurelius, but it still bowed to her. The next day, he did something unexpected. He went to her, no entourage, no pretext. He walked to her chamber door like a petitioner. She was alone, seated at her writing table, dictating letters. When she saw him, she dismissed the scribe with a gesture. "Gaius," she said gently, "sit." He did. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "What do you want from me?" She looked at him, really looked, not with contempt, not with victory, with understanding. I wanted to see if you could love anything that didn't adore you first. He swallowed. And? You failed, she said. No cruelty in it, just truth. He nodded slowly. I know. She leaned forward. But there is still use in you. He looked up. Her voice was soft but precise. You are still a symbol. You still command a shadow, and shadows can be repurposed. He didn't respond. Not yet. She stood and crossed to him, placed her hand gently on his shoulder. I will give you time, she said, but you will return, and when you do, it will be as I say. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with her words and the growing weight of inevitability. The days that followed blurred into sameness. Gaius no longer received visitors. Couriers came and went, but never for him. The palace functioned without interruption, yet his presence had become ornamental. Like a retired statue left in a hallway, no one walked anymore. He woke late, ate slowly, wandered the imperial gardens with a slight stoop in his shoulders he never noticed before. The servants no longer bowed when he passed, not out of disrespect, but out of habit lost. They simply didn't associate him with authority anymore. And yet, despite it all, Illyria kept him close. Not physically, but she never removed his titles. She never publicly disgraced him. On official documents, he remained Praefectus Aurelius, first consort of Rome. His likeness still hung beside hers in council chambers. His bust remained on the steps of the Curia. But each of those things now felt like an echo, or a warning. He thought often about Thalia, where she had gone, what she had become, whether she had known what her presence would cost him. But the more he asked himself these questions, the more hollow they rang, because deep down he knew she had only exposed what was already true. His love was weak, his loyalty weaker, and his grasp on power non-existent. One evening, while wandering through the West Garden, he saw Lucian seated under a pomegranate tree with his tutor, reciting lines from the Aeneid. Who is greater? The boy asked. Aeneas or the one who teaches him loss? The tutor stumbled for an answer. Gaius felt his throat tighten. Illyria had begun molding Lucian, not as a prince, but as a sovereign. Every lesson shaped for strength, insight, and control. There would be no softness in the next emperor, no indulgence, no vulnerability. Lucian would never make his father's mistakes, and then came the day the city changed, not in fire, not in rebellion, but in silence. The same silence that had crept into the villa now slipped into the Senate, into the temples, into the barracks. Illyria declared a new festival. It was called the Vigil of Shadows, a celebration of sacrifice, humility, and purification. Rome was confused. It wasn't a traditional holiday. No ancient rites were associated with it. No gods were honored, but the empress declared it sacred, and so it became sacred. Citizens lit lamps in their homes and placed veils over their mirrors. Processions walked the streets in gray robes. Even the Vestals covered their hair and extinguished their torches for 1 hour at dusk, the first time in recorded history. The message was clear, even if unspoken. Forget the light for a moment. Remember the cost of brightness. Honor the darkness that teaches us what light is. The center of the celebration was the Forum, and at its heart, on a stone platform raised above the square, stood a simple throne, draped in crimson cloth, unoccupied. Illyria sat beside it. Lucian stood to her left, and Gaius. Gaius was nowhere, until the final hour. A trumpet sounded, and he walked in, clad in plain black. No armor, no cloak, just cloth, fitted close to his body like mourning garb. his hair unbound, his feet bare. He walked across the square slowly, through a crowd that parted not out of reverence, but out of uncertainty. No one knew what they were witnessing. When he reached the platform, he did not mount it. He did not greet the crowd. He did not look at his wife or his son. He knelt and placed a folded cloth at the base of the crimson throne, then rose and walked away. The square remained silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Later, many would say they didn't know what had happened until the following day, when a public notice appeared on every gate, every temple, every wall, a decree sealed by Illyria and Lucian. Prefectus Gaius Aurelius has surrendered his imperial authority. In honor of his past service, he shall retain his name, his lands, and the right to live out his days in reflection. Let no one speak ill of him, nor raise him again to command. This is his wish and ours. The empire shifted again, this time without blood. But behind the elegant wording, everyone knew. He had been made to kneel, and not by force, by design. Illyria's ascension was now complete, but she did not celebrate. She worked. In the weeks that followed, reforms swept the city. The grain trade was reorganized. Corrupt magistrates dismissed. Foreign provinces received direct envoys from the empress. Even the Senate began to change, with older voices retiring, replaced by younger ones loyal to her name. No one challenged it, not after what had happened to Gaius. And yet, she was not finished, because vengeance was not about exposure. It was not about humiliation. Those were steps, but the final blow was still waiting. It came one afternoon, quietly. In the imperial archive, Illyria summoned a single servant, a woman, slender, wrapped in simple robes, her face veiled. When she removed the veil, Gaius stood in the far corner, watching, and his knees buckled. It was Thalia, alive, unmarked, and smiling. He staggered back, but didn't run. He couldn't. His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this, not after everything, not after the silence and the exile and the shadows. But Illyria spoke softly. "She has not forgotten you," she said. "She begged me not to hurt you. She defended you, even when you could not defend her." Gaius opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Illyria stepped closer. "I brought her back," she whispered, "so you could look into the eyes that made you betray me and see what's left of the man who did it." Then she nodded to Thalia, and the girl turned away, not in fear, not in sadness, but in pity. She left the chamber, and Gaius remained behind, alone with the woman who had orchestrated his fall. "You could have killed me," he said hoarsely. Illyria tilted her head. "Yes, but why waste your body when your mind is a better tomb?" There are kinds of death the Empire never records. Not on marble, not in scrolls, not in the songs the poets sing. But every servant in the palace knew it. Gaius Aurelius was dead. Not in flesh, not yet, but in presence, in will, in power. He walked still. He ate slowly. He bathed in cold water, sat by windows and stared for hours. But he did not speak. He did not write. He did not ask questions. He had become a shadow, and even the shadows had begun to forget him. Illyria, however, remembered everything. She remembered the moment she was dragged into the villa as a spoil of war. The moment she felt the cold marble floor under her knees and heard the crowd call her pretty in Latin. They didn't think she understood. She remembered the way Gaius had looked at her, not with cruelty, but with entitlement, as if she were a thing, a bauble to polish and use. She had smiled at him that day, not out of fear, but out of calculation, because Illyria did not believe in accidents. She believed in purpose, in movement, in inevitability. And this final stage, had been inevitable from the start. But it still had to be done carefully. Gaius lived in a guest wing now, far from the imperial quarters. 2 guards stood at his door, not as protection, but as formality. He was allowed visitors, though none came. He was allowed walks, though he rarely took them. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, only in brief phrases. When Lucian visited, he rose to greet him. But even the child had changed. No longer wide-eyed and curious, Lucian now stood tall and spoke like a senator. His hair was combed with intention. His tunic bore the new sigil Illyria had chosen, a phoenix bound in iron. Gaius studied the embroidery one day, then asked quietly, "Do you know what it means?" Lucian nodded. "It means rebirth through control." Gaius almost laughed. Almost, but he nodded instead. That evening, he received a visitor, the priest. Not one of Rome's usual clergy. Not a white-robed, perfumed temple keeper. This man was older, leaner, with eyes like burned parchment and fingers stained with ink. He said he came on Illyria's request. "We are to prepare for a rite," he said simply. Gaius stared. "What rite?" The priest smiled gently. "A purification." It was not a question, and so it began. 3 days of fasting. No wine, no contact. His food was brought without salt, his chamber stripped of decoration. Even his mirror was removed. On the second day, he received a set of instructions, handwritten in her hand. "You may wear white. You may speak only when asked. You will kneel when the time comes. You will not resist. You will make Rome remember." He read it twice. Then he burned the parchment and waited. The morning of the ritual, the palace moved with quiet precision. No trumpets, no crowds, only whispers, only ritual. Guards escorted him to the atrium, the same atrium where his marriage feast had once been held. The marble had been scrubbed clean, the statues veiled, the windows shuttered. At the center stood a single chair, not a throne, not even a seat of dignity. It was low, simple, wooden. Before it, a basin of water, a small blade, and Illyria. She wore red, not imperial red, not the rich velvet crimson of power. This was a harsher shade, rust-colored, dried blood red. Her hands were gloved, her face bare. She held no scepter, no symbol, only silence. He was led forward. She gestured to the chair. He sat. She stepped close and took his face in both hands. No words, just the touch. Then she knelt before him and removed his sandals. The silence deepened. In that room, that sacred sterile room, power had no voice, only form. She took the blade and placed it in his palm. He stared down at it, then up at her. "I don't understand," he said for the first time in months. Her voice was calm. "You will." Then she spoke aloud, not to him, but to the shadows. "Gaius Aurelius, former prefectus, consort to the empress, defiler of trust, breaker of oath, you stand before your people not as a criminal, but as a mirror." The Gaius felt the weight of the blade shift in his hand. She continued, "You have sinned not only in act, but in legacy. You broke the sanctity of alliance. You worshipped appetite above duty. You betrayed not me, but the structure that kept Rome upright. And now you will rebuild it, in pain, in silence, in sight." 2 guards stepped forward, not with weapons, but with a small iron bowl and a cloth. She turned to Gaius. "You will remove the betrayal from yourself. You will offer it back to Rome. And in doing so, you will become clean." His breath caught. "No," he whispered, but the guards were behind him now, not forcing, just waiting. "You said you forgave me," he choked. She nodded. "I did, but Rome hasn't." He looked down, then closed his fingers around the blade. The steel pressed against his palm. "I can't," he whispered. "You must," she said softly. And then, with movements so slow they seemed dreamlike, he raised the blade. His hand shook. The priest stepped closer, murmured something in a dead language. The guards steadied his shoulders, and Gaius Aurelius, once warlord of the North, once lion of the empire, took the blade and pressed it to the soft skin beneath his right eye. He screamed once, then twice, then fell silent. The sound was wet, sharp, animal. Blood pooled in the basin. The cloth was dipped. The priest stepped forward, took the blade from his slack hand, and nodded once to Illyria. She did not smile. She did not cry. She stepped forward and gently wiped the blood from his cheek. Then she leaned in and whispered, "Now we begin." He did not die. He should have. The physician said as much. 3 times. The damage was catastrophic. The eye was lost, the nerves mangled, the socket torn open like fruit. And yet somehow, the blood stopped. The fever never came. His body, battered and broken, chose to live. But it was not life. He lay in a darkened chamber, half blind, bound in linen, breathing through cracked lips. His voice was gone, his hair untouched, his hands shaking. For 2 days no one came. On the 3rd she did. Illyria, no crown, no guards, no velvet, just her. She stood beside the bed for a long time, said nothing, then sat. "You lived," she murmured. He didn't answer. "You've always been stubborn. I should have remembered that." Still nothing. She leaned forward and took a spoon from the tray beside him. Broth, weak and bitter, but enough to keep a man alive. She raised it to his lips. He drank. When she pulled the spoon away, his lips moved, but no sound came. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I know what you're trying to say." She placed the spoon back on the tray. "But it isn't finished." He tried to turn his head. She pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Gaius, this is your last debt and your greatest gift." He stared with his one remaining eye. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" she asked. He blinked. "Do you remember the chains?" A long pause. He nodded barely. "I wore them like silk, because I knew then what you never understood. Rome only kneels to spectacle, not truth, not justice. Spectacle." She stood. "And you, my love, are going to give them the greatest one of all." That night the order was issued, an open tribunal, in the Forum, with witnesses, with the Senate, with the people. Not a trial. Not exactly. There would be no charges, no defenses, just a ceremony, a story, and Gaius Aurelius would tell it. By morning the city was buzzing. The rumors spiraled. The empress had gone mad. Gaius had murdered a priest. Gaius had confessed to treason. Gaius had seen a vision. Every version spread like fire. But none were true, and none were false because Ilaria said nothing. And so Rome waited. The Forum was prepared. Stone seats scrubbed, banners hung. No guards posted, none needed. The crowd would police itself. Curiosity was stronger than violence. At the center of it all, a simple platform, a single column, and a low marble table. Gaius was led there in silence. He could walk now, barely, one arm in a sling, face half covered in linen. He wore white again, not by tradition, but because it made the blood more visible. He stood at the center, trembling. Then she appeared, Illyria, draped in black this time, hair unbound, no makeup, no regalia, just authority. She walked to the edge of the platform, raised her hand, and Rome fell silent. Then she spoke. "Today is not about punishment, it is about transformation. The empire must see what becomes of pride without temperance, of love without loyalty, of men without limits." She turned to him. "Gaius, tell them." His lips moved. Nothing came. The crowd waited. Then a scribe stepped forward. Not from the priesthood, not from the court. A common man, ink-stained fingers, kind eyes. He unrolled a scroll and began to read. It was Gaius's confession, written in his hand, sealed in blood. A story of rise, of conquest, of arrogance, of betrayal, of a woman scorned, and of a city that demanded reckoning. The people listened, some wept, some laughed, some watched in horror. When the scribe finished, he stepped back. Illyria approached again. The man who stands before you was once your shield, your sword. He defended the gates, fed your sons to victory, but he also fed your daughters to fire. He forgot who Rome belongs to. She drew a dagger from her sleeve and handed it to him. He didn't move. The crowd gasped. Illyria turned to them. He may choose one more offering or nothing. Silence. Then, or slowly, painfully, Gaius lifted his hand, took the blade, raised it to his face. The crowd screamed, but he was steady. One motion, one cry. The second eye fell. Illyria caught it before it touched the ground. She turned, held it up. Rome, she said, do not forget. The silence was total. No cheers, no cries, only breath, only awe. She turned to Gaius again. You may rest. And he collapsed. They carried him away like a relic, and the forum stayed still long after nightfall, because they had not seen justice. They had seen something greater. They had seen power made flesh. The eyes were not buried, they were preserved in a shallow bronze dish lined with black salt and myrrh, placed inside a sealed marble niche behind the imperial altar. No inscription, no dedication, just two pale spheres, clouded and still, watching nothing, but meant to be seen. Only a few ever knew where they were kept, but everyone knew they existed. That was enough. The city moved differently after that. The forum, once a place of oratory and barter, now held silence longer. The guards saluted with more stiffness. Children played further from the palaces. Servants whispered at lower tones. Rome had not changed in law, or currency, or map, but it had changed. It had remembered fear, and fear remembered her name. Illyria, not crowned, not proclaimed. No ceremony ever called her imperatrix, but no one doubted who ruled. Not the Senate, not the temples, not the generals. She wrote no edicts, signed no manifestos. Her words traveled by mouth, by glance, by rumor, and every door opened before they arrived. Lucian, now 11, was appointed as her co-regent. A formality. The boy was bright, but still a boy. It was Illyria who saw the merchants punished for grain extortion. Illyria who ordered the rebuilding of the aqueducts after the summer drought. Illyria who had the magistrate of Puteoli dismissed after reports of child indenture. Her rule was not cruel, but it was sharp. She walked with no guards, ate with no advisors, slept in a chamber with no locks. She was not untouchable, just untouched. Gaius was never seen again. After the ritual, he was taken to a villa far outside the city, an estate once gifted to him by the Senate, now surrounded by a garden of thorns and high walls. Some said he wandered its paths barefoot, speaking to birds. Others said he went completely mute. One rumor claimed he composed a scroll of repentance in his blood. But when opened, the pages were blank. Illyria never visited, but she sent flowers. Weekly, always the same. Black hyacinths and white lilies. A language only he understood. And so, years passed. Rome flourished. With fear came order. With order came quiet. And with quiet, prosperity. Foreign ambassadors began arriving not to flatter the boy regent, but to watch the woman behind the veil. They brought gifts, rare dyes, trained leopards, scrolls of forbidden sciences. She accepted all, spoke little, and gave less. She trusted few, but Rome trusted her until the child became a man. Lucian turned 16 beneath a blood-red moon. The omens were confused. Some priests called it a blessing, others a curse, but Illyria said nothing. She simply prepared a feast, not a public one, a private supper, just her and Lucian. No servants, no music, no distractions. They dined in the old chamber where she had first kissed Gaius. The boy was dressed in ceremonial white, his curls oiled and bound. He sat upright, his hands precise, his tone measured. But his eyes, his father's eyes, never left hers. When the final course was cleared, she poured the wine herself. "Mother," he said. "Yes." "I have a question." She nodded. "Why didn't you kill him?" She didn't blink. "I did," she said. "Just not the way you mean." He tilted his head. "You taught me to finish what I begin." "I did. But you left him alive." She looked at him closely and saw it. The gleam, not innocence, not admiration, ambition. She rose from the table, walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, the lights of Rome shimmered. "You think he was your enemy," she said. "He wasn't. He was your warning." Lucian said nothing. She turned. "I broke him so you would never need to break, so you would know what failure tastes like before it ever reaches your tongue." He stood now, tall, proud, almost regal. "But you failed to teach me one thing," he said. She raised an eyebrow. He stepped forward. "How to share power." She didn't laugh. She didn't speak. He drew the blade slowly from his belt. Ceremonial, narrow, curved. She recognized it. The dagger from the tribunal, still stained. He held it between them, then laid it on the table. "Teach me," he said, and for the first time in years she smiled. Not cold, not cruel, but proud. She walked to him, took his hand, guided it to the hilt, and pressed it into his palm. "Then begin," she said. The years that followed became legend. Lucian ruled with her, not beneath her, not beside her, but with her. They became twin figures of myth. The boy who saw his father blind himself, and the woman who taught Rome to see. Together they reshaped the empire. Together they crushed rebellion in Gaul, rewrote tax codes in Sicily, dissolved corrupt legions and replaced them with civic militias. Together they built temples, not to gods but to ideas. Memory, loyalty, vision. The dish with the eyes remained untouched until Illyria died. No illness, no accident. She simply stopped breathing one morning at the age of 45. Lucian held her hand until it cooled. Then, without announcement, he carried her body to the forum and burned it there, in silence, in front of no one. He scattered the ashes beneath the pomegranate tree where he once recited poetry to a tutor who no longer lived. Then he returned to the altar, removed the dish, and held it aloft. "Rome," he whispered, alone in the chamber. "This is what happens when you forget who watches you." Then he crushed the eyes underfoot and walked out, never once looking back.